What is up, guys? It is time for a little MLB Deeper Dive. We're not going to go game by game. Did that earlier today with my pal Greg Ehrenberg, but we are going to do it even better for you guys, talking about the top pitching, talking about the top stacks, talking in great depth with a man who's going to take me through everything that you guys need to know today. But I'm Chris Spags, joined by our Director of Customer Success, a man who has all the baseball information that is both useful and useless you could possibly find out there. He's Terry McBride. How are you doing, Terry?
So much more full of the useless information, but yeah, hopefully some useful stuff trickles in around the edges and we can help some people out today. So looking forward to talking this one through. Looks like a really good slate. Some really interesting pitching options on board. A couple great spots to attack with bats. So should be a fun one. How you doing, bud?
I am good. I'm excited to do a show with you. And I guess what's worth pointing out up top here that we need your likes for the show more than ever because of the namesake of the Awesemo YouTube channel, a man who always joins Terry and I on these Monday morning or Monday afternoon voyages through the MLB slate. Alex Baker, big timed us today. Too busy traveling from his event that he had in Charlotte over the weekend. Couldn't make the show today. So we need those likes more than ever, Terry, because we're like orphan children right now with no Alex Awesemo Baker.
That's it. We're just wandering around out here, hoping we can do a good job, hoping that we can earn everybody's likes and everything. So it would make us look great if we get, a decent amount more likes than when the boss is here. I think that would really be something to shoot for. But if we could even come close to what we normally put up, I think we'd be ahead.
Yeah, we would love to flex on everybody here that Terry and I are the true draws. I think everybody knows that about the Awesemo channel. It's not Awesemo that makes it go. It's Terry McBride and Chris Spags. And no, we obviously will have Alex back tomorrow, back in the fold. So hit that like button for us now. Show us a little love. And also make sure to check out the free premium tool of the day. We talk a lot about ownership on the show. At the halfway point of the show, we'll do our usual spin on money time, giving you guys top 5 owned plays for Draftkings and Fanduel. But today, if you want to get all the data for yourself, you can get the ownership rankings free today, which is normally part of our MLB Express package. Today, that's a free one. It's basically the ownership projections, but in grade form. So you'll see the guys who are the highest owned as having a grade instead of having a number assigned to it. But that is going to be a big part of your process as well, which you can get for free today at the site. So go check that out. And we would not be able to put this show on today if it were not thanks to our sponsors over at Jock Market. And if you haven't heard, Jock Market has turned the fantasy sports world into a stock exchange where you forget about waiting until the end of the games. You can get your payouts in real time, every minute, every second of all the games that are going on today. They have daily markets for the NBA, MLB, NHL, and PGA. And again, you can make that real money all throughout the course of the game based on your observations of the game. So if you're a person out there whose team watched the tape, you can watch some of these games going on for MLB, for NBA, for any of these things, and sort of make your assessments on if a guy's underperforming. If you think he'll be better, buy in. If you think a guy's overperforming and he's somebody who's going to crash throughout the day, sell off and make your profit right there. But that's sort of the flexibility you can get at Jock Market. Make sure to go download the app today to get started. Use our exclusive promo code Awesemo20 for a $20 deposit on your $20 bonus, on your first deposit. It's an exclusive offer that's only for the Awesemo community. So make sure to take advantage of it today. Building your bankroll, the most important thing you can do on a site like Jock Market. You might only need that $20 bonus to get yourself going where you need to go to make some real profits on there. So go use the promo code Awesemo20 for a $20 bonus on Jock Market, Jock MKT. Download them in the App Store or check out the site today. And Terry, any overarching observations for you on the slate? We're going to talk about top pitching up top like we normally do. We'll get to the top stacks in the back half. But I know you are a man who does like to go into the game within the game of MLB DFS. So anything you're observing for yourself on the slate with how you're either constructing things or just anything else you've seen?
I think it really breaks down along pitching lines for me for this one, more so than a lot of slates do. I think there's a lot of good pitching options for only a 6-game slate. There's really only 3 guys that I want to completely cross off my list, essentially, and that's Henkes, Shoemaker, and Kim. All 3 of those guys could put up something, but I don't think they're really going to be relevant. But all the other guys on the slate are at worst interesting. There's some good pricing up and down. There's a lot of those guys just right in the mid-range, so they're priced somewhat similarly. And then they break down pretty similarly in terms of their probability of success. So it's a kind of a night where I'm going to kind of reach out to some of these different pitchers, try and get equal shares of everybody, or, maybe tick up above the field on a few different plays, but, really try and spread out in my pitching exposures. I think it's going to be really fun on DK where you get 2 of them and you can really start mixing and matching them and putting them together in unique combinations, particularly with the way some of them are priced. So just a really cool, fun looking pitching slate to get into. And then the bats kind of come along for the ride.
Definitely a lot of guys you make a case for the pitching today, as we did this morning on the MLB Strategy Show. So we're going to dig into a little more now. Let's talk about some of the top pitching options. According to the Top Pitchers tool, which is part of that premium offering that you can always get for yourself at awesemo.com/join. Top Pitchers, Top Stacks tool. 2 important parts of the process for people who, honestly, if you're short on time or if you just don't understand MLB and don't know enough about for yourself, or even if you do, honestly, it's a great way to shorten the process to get a real read on data points you can point to. And today, the Top Pitchers tool going to push people towards Brandon Woodruff, a player there who does have a 1 in 3 chance of being one of the top 2 pitchers today on DraftKings. On Terry's side as well, Fanduel, I'm going to give Terry full credit for Fanduel ownership as well. He's clearly the guy behind making everything work over at Fanduel.
Except their customer support. I don't have anything to do with that.
That's good point. That's their director, their customer success over there. That's entirely on them. Nothing to do with Terry. But Brandon Woodruff, a pitcher who has clearly got the best stuff, I would say, on the slate. And maybe people can argue it a little bit more, but strikeout rate for him right there with any of the studs we normally talk about. Over a 30% K rate for him on the year. Going back to 2019 either, it's not one of those aberration numbers where you can point to and go like, oh, maybe this guy's due to go the other way. He's at a 29.9% K rate since 2019 for himself. A 0.74 whip, which is better this year compared to his longer term sample size, but still a 1.0 whip guy going back to 2019. And Terry, I've talked about Brandon Woodruff earlier today, so I'll let you talk a little bit more about some of the raw fundamentals here that you're seeing with him, a guy who's been really good. The one thing you have to point to is he's facing San Diego, who does have 3.3 implied runs. That total's actually come down a little bit from this morning, but he is facing a tough, Padres team that's pretty much, about as close as they're going to get to full health right now, striking out at a 20% clip against right-hand pitching on the year. And what is your trust level in Brandon Woodruff? Like, I think it's hard to argue that his stuff isn't the best on the slate, but he is in a matchup that's just going to make it a little bit tougher to get there. So just how are you viewing Woodruff and how are you approaching this one?
Yeah, I think what you said at the end there for me is probably the most important factor. He kind of ranks in my projections right alongside some of the other guys, and I consider the matchups a little bit more plus for those guys. He's got a little bit more work to do. I agree. He's probably the top end pitcher. Depends what you consider Blake Snell in terms of the length he's been giving us lately, but those guys are 1A and 1 on this slate, whichever way you look at it talent-wise. So I think Woodruff certainly has the talent to overcome this lineup, but it is a good lineup that doesn't strike out like crazy. So it's a tougher spot for him than most of the other ones. I have a slight disagreement with our top starters just in terms of the way that they rank. I've got the same 4 guys basically at the top of my board, just kind of in a little bit of a different order. So I'm a little bit lower on Woodruff than we are as a site overall, but I've got him within 3 points of my overall leader, which is Blake Snell, because I'm giving him a credit for a little bit more innings. But he's right there. So, I mean, Woodruff is very much in play. He's one of those mix-in guys that I want to get good shares of. It just looks like there's a significant amount of public ownership on him as well. So you're not exactly getting sneaky with him. And on a slate where everybody's kind of breaking down similarly in terms of their probability of success, he is out in ahead of the field in that, but not by such a big degree that we can totally ignore the ownership. So I think he kind of comes back to the field a little bit based on the matchup, based on the overexposure. He's probably still the top option. Like, I do want to get a good share of him, but I think at 35%, I might look to undercut the field slightly just because I want to spread out to a bunch of pitchers on this slate.
I think it's a reasonable way to look at it. And I guess the big question I would have for you, which is one that we debated a little bit this morning as well, but I'm curious your take, because Brandon Woodruff, to me, the price tag being where it is, like, I don't necessarily, with how I view MLB DFS, want to go down to John Means, but on DraftKings, I feel like that's the most direct pivot that you have. You could certainly go in some other directions, and I think we'll talk more about the opposing pitcher in Woodruff's game, Blake Snell, coming up in a second. But in terms of pure price tag and the top pitcher stool as well for DraftKings today, you do have a 33% chance of Woodruff being one of the top 2 pitchers on the slate, but for John Means, you have a 20.6% chance of being a top pitcher, substantially less ownership. And Means is a guy to me that I think there's some volatility here where I do think he's going to regress over the course of time, but his strikeout stuff has been really good. He's missing bats at a pretty high level. He's facing a Minnesota team that does have dangerous power that is, to me, over the course of the season, going to start to pay off a little bit more against John Means. But when you just talk about matchup and all that, are you willing to go to John Means as a slightly cheaper price tag, Terry, given the fact that it's just so much less ownership and projection is going to be lower, but in terms of the ceiling and the ability to get there, like, Means pitches deep into games too, and just, I think, has what you could say is a little bit of an easier matchup than facing the Padres.
Yeah, I'm worried about Means. What I really like looking at him on the DraftKings board here is that he stands out significantly for his probability of being a top 2 starter in Alex's numbers as compared to his ownership. That's one of the bigger gulfs we've seen between those 2 numbers. So there's just massive leverage on getting to him. It's partly based on the matchup. It's partly based on the 10-2 asking price for him. People just aren't comfortable paying that for John Means. I'm not comfortable paying that for John Means, if I'm being totally honest about it. He's benefiting from a 188 batting average on balls in play against. He's an extremely lucky pitcher. That's something that's carried through. Last year, he was at 216. Year before that, 256. So when he's been good through his career, he's gotten a lot of good luck, but it has carried through for him. So he's certainly on the board. It's just, I don't necessarily consider him the best direct pivot. Like, I would rather spend $9,300 and get to Lance Lynn. You're swallowing more ownership that way, though, which is the real problem. Where you benefit with going to means is by picking up all that leverage on the field. I think there's a safer probably play in Yusei Kikuchi. I don't know that he's necessarily got the same upside as Means. He probably falls a little bit short of that, and he's getting more owned than Means, but he's a lower price, probably a little bit better. It's a tricky spot with Means. He's a pitcher I just totally do not trust based on the luck factor and based on, he's made some improvements. They're tricky to find. Just looking at him overall, 15% swinging strike rate this year, 15.6 called strike rate, both up from where he's been. The 15% swinging strike rate up from 12.5 last year, 9.9 the year before. So just significantly different pitcher from what he's been in the past. But still, there's that luck factor that it drives me bonkers trying to figure this guy out. I think he's too high priced, but given that leverage, I think it makes sense on DraftKings to pay it just to get that.
Yeah, to me, I think Means, I would agree, like he's too expensive, but if I got, let's say shave 10% off my Brandon Woodruff number, and I think I'd be comfortable doing that and putting that towards John Means, a guy who's currently projecting for 3% ownership on DK. I just don't hate the move, and sort of made the case earlier. So if you did watch the MLB strategy show this morning, my apologies for sort of recycling a take here, but hopefully it'll be more refined this time go around. That's what I'm really hoping for. But John Means, I think you look at him and like the fly ball numbers really jump out, a 47% fly ball rate. But today he's playing in Minnesota, which is still not the hottest yet. 75 degrees in Minnesota can still make that ball carry with the way that the humidity works in Minnesota, one of the better parks in terms of balancing all that for the hitters. He's facing a Minnesota team that's so highly owned. And I know, we normally aren't necessarily trying to get leverage with a pitcher against bats, but for a guy who's pitching over 6 innings per start, and it's going to be buoyed a little bit by the no-hitter game, I just feel like Means to me being able to pitch comparably deep into the game as Woodruff, being able to maybe get strikeouts. And again, just hoping you sort of luck box him, not getting hit by power very hard, which is going to come from at some point. You can't have that high of a fly ball rate as the weather starts heating up and not have it go out a little bit more. But you just so much ownership going to Minnesota here that I do feel like there's sort of a dual prong logic going to Means at very low ownership. And I still would say to me, 10% is the max, but I think just getting a little bit there, I guess I'm a little more willing to go there. And Terry, I know we've talked about this on some shows, but when you see that lofty ownership from Minnesota, projected to be about 13% overall owned as a stack. And then you have some guys here like our producer Tyler's favorite player, Nelson Cruz, as well as Mitch Garver, over 20% ownership. A lot of guys here are going to be pretty highly owned, Terry, where like you are getting direct leverage against the field if you go to Means. And I guess, is that something you would consider at all? I know you've sort of talked about this in the past, but give people your take on that, because it is one way I think that you could get different from the field.
Yeah, generally speaking, I prefer to do it the other way around, where I'm taking bats against a highly owned pitcher and doing it that way. But when we're seeing such a big delta between the probability of success and the ownership, like we're seeing on Means on DK today, I think it makes sense to attack that. And you're going up against it. It's kind of like an added bonus that the hitters are also going to be highly owned for that. Like it would make sense to go to that regardless of where the hitters were owned, just given that probability of success delta between how much the public is getting to them. But with the bonus factor of the hitters being highly owned, yeah, if he shuts them down, you're really in a strong position then from your SP, your SP1 spot. It's probably a spot where the public is overreacting for Minnesota's reputation against lefties. They're very, very good for power against lefties for sure. 187 team ISO in the split, create runs 9% better than average, 20 home runs against lefties. But 24.7% strikeout rate, there's plenty of strikeouts for him there. That's a little bit below the middle of the league. So it's not an incredibly great matchup. And they've been behind the curve a little bit. Like Nelson hasn't been tattooing lefties like he was quite to the degree he was last year or in recent memory. So there's enough here to cling to that I think Means could put up a good start. It's still, for me, it's a major dice roll. I do not trust the pitcher, but I would be there if I was playing on DK.
So let's go to some other chalky pitchers. And again, we're going to talk through basically all the core pitching plays today, but hit that like button, guys, because I'm going to give you guys some ownership numbers in addition to the money time coming up in 11 minutes or so. We will talk about some of the ownership numbers, because I think it's really important for this slate in particular to dig in a little more. And one guy whose ownership has come up a bit is Lance Lynn, where he is basically now projected to be a little bit higher owned than Brandon Woodruff, also projected to be substantially higher owned than John Means, but I guess that's neither here nor there at this point. But Lance Lynn projected to be owned by more than a third of the field on DraftKings. And to me, I think he's really the safest pitcher on the board in terms of, he's going to be pitching 5.5, 6 innings per the start. He's facing a St. Louis team that I think doesn't grade out that well. 3.6 implied runs total sort of says it all there. And Lynn's strikeout numbers, like they're good. They're 28% K rate. Somebody asked the premium Slack earlier who you'd play at pitcher, or if it was Lynn or Woodruff in I think the $777 tournament on DK. And for me, the safety of Lynn, I think is hard to ignore, Terry, but the ownership for like the large field GPPs, I do feel like you can shave a little bit off Lance Lynn. I think the top pitchers tool kind of tells that story too, where you have a 27% chance of Lance Lynn being a top 2 pitcher today, 36% ownership for him. Like, I think if you said, hey, Spags, like, put your life on the line on any pitcher on the slate, I think it's probably Lance Lynn for me, but I still think for tournaments, like, he now to me looks a little bit overowned for those larger field GPPs.
So you don't want to throw your lot in with Matt Shoemaker with your life on the line, dangling over an open ball cannon?
He seems like a good guy. I guess, like, the question would be, how much of a bro is he? Like, is he one of those guys who's gonna be like, I'm gonna really try hard for you today, more than I normally would in my professional baseball career? And that's a question I simply can't answer right now.
Yeah, I think I'm with you. I think, dangling over the pit of vipers, I think I would have to go with Mr. Lance Lynn here. He's a guy through his course of his career has pitched deep into games very reliably. He likes being on the hill. He actively argues with his manager when they come out to hook him most of the time. So I love getting to him. He was out for the last 2 weeks of April, and then he had 4 straight starts where he only went 5 flat innings. But then last time out, he went 6 flat, struck out only 2 twins in that start. But overall, he's a 27.7% strikeout rate on the year, 0.98 whip, 3.95 xFIP over 7 starts, everything to love. 11.2 exactly matches his swinging strike rate from last year at 11.2%. 40 and 2/3 inning sample size. So the called strikes are down a tiny little bit, but it's nothing I'm worried about. He seems like he's in midseason form other than the length that he was pitching. And I think that's, now that he's stretched back out, I think we're going to see that here. So starting tonight, I would fully buy in for 6-7 innings per start and a decent amount of strikeouts. I was hoping his ownership would be down, people giving too much respect for the Cards, but it doesn't look like that's going that way. This is still a good spot, though. This is still a spot where I'd be comfortable rostering him at or above the field. He's that good of a pitcher, and he's that likely to go deep, give us a reliable, safe start here.
So he is going to project basically in line, actually exactly in line according to Awesemo's projections, with another pitcher in Blake Snell, who's a little bit cheaper. And that, to me, I think is sort of why I don't mind Lance Lynn. Like, he's projecting right there with Woodruff a little bit behind, but projecting alongside Snell. I think that sort of gives me the reasons I feel strongly about Lynn just being a play that I'm willing to get to and feel some degree of comfort in. But Terry, we're also getting questions here about single entry GPPs, how people are approaching pitcher there. We talked about a few of these guys, and we have to talk about Snell too. But how are you feeling about a single entry GPP pitcher? And I guess talk to me about Fanduel as well, where you're only playing the one pitcher on there. Are you feeling like they're Lynn or Woodruff would be your direction, or would you want to go to Snell, who we have to hit on next anyway?
Yeah, there's probably enough to do. Well, let me pull up real quick if I can get to the top stacks here. I just want to see that, because that's part of that question. If you're only making one lineup, it's not just about that pitcher decision. It's about what you're doing with those bats. Because if you go to one of the super chalky pitchers, then you've got to get different with some of the bats here. And looking at the board on the top stacks, I'm on the DK one. Among the top 5 stacks on the board, they're all negatively leveraged. So if you go with one of the super chalky pitchers or 2 of the super chalky pitchers on DK even, then you're getting into trouble where you're going to 2 teams if you want to get different with some of the bats, or you're going to have to go really deep down lineup for some less popular bats within those popular stacks. So it leads you down a pretty tricky direction if you're only building one lineup. It's a spot where I usually would be more inclined to go to one of these other highly ranked pitchers who is getting a little bit less ownership. You can still do it with somebody who's popular. Like Blake Snell, to me, makes some sense there. He's and looking at the top starters tool, it might sound like it's a little bit upside down because he's getting more ownership than what his probability of being a top starter is, but his overall raw aggregate ownership there is less than the other guys, and he gives you the affordability while maintaining a lot of upside because he's discounted from where Lance Lynn and Brandon Woodruff come in. I'm looking at the FanDuel while I'm saying that. I believe it's true across sites. Yeah, he's at 8,900 compared to 93 and 10.6. So I think it makes some sense to save a little bit of money, go to a guy who's in a great matchup for strikeouts. I've got Snell projected for just over 5 innings, and he's still my highest projected FanDuel pitcher in my personal rankings. So I really think there's a good chance for Blake Snell, even if he only goes 5, to put up a really strong start here. If he goes 6 and he manages to give us more, get that quality start bonus on FanDuel, then we're really humming, and he's discounted for the opportunity.
So let's talk more about Snell here, because he's going to be a pitcher that is going to be very much in play on both sites today. Projected for just shy of 40% ownership on DraftKings, as Terry was hinting at there. Does look a little bit overowned according to the top pitchers tool, but the strikeout stuff has been good for him on the year, 33% K rate. The issue has really been that he's given up more walks and hits overall, 1.46 whip compared to a 1.3 whip going back to 2019. And Snell in the spot, I mean, Milwaukee's getting a little bit healthier on the year. They're striking out at a 27% clip. I guess the lineup that they have projected today as well, projected for me to have a 26.7 7% aggregate K rate. You do have some bats that can, make things tougher with Yelich in the mix. Obviously, El Garcia as well. I think, league average strikeout guy, but still somebody who definitely has some power and is better than some of the Brewers hitters we've seen previously. The question I would have for you, Terry, would be for the Milwaukee hitters. Like, how confident are you in this Milwaukee lineup being the sort of doormat that they've been treated as over the last few weeks? Because I think to me, that's part of the Snell narrative, is that like people are just, remembering, hey, Milwaukee's been rolled over and over again, but they're getting a little bit healthier. It just gives me some concern that Snell ends up just a bit more overowned than he would be normally.
Yeah, and it's definitely a consideration here, right? Anytime you're putting Christian Yelich back into a lineup, they're going to be improved. That's an easy one to say on my side of things here, but I still think there's enough downside in this lineup just looking up and down the strikeout numbers. And it's not like Yelich is a superstar who only strikes out 15% of the time. He's got a relatively healthy strikeout number himself. He could turn on one and completely change the game and misshape Blake Snell's score here, but we're dealing with that. Milwaukee also has, Tyler points out, Milwaukee also has Willy Adames now in the trade from Tampa Bay, which is actually very true and a good point. So yeah, there's plenty of guys here who Snell can get on top of with the strikeouts. The big concern to me is really a big thing around the length. And like you mentioned, some of the walks, 13.7% walks is just too much, 1.46 whip. But he's really, the concern for me is the length that he's given us so far. 40 and a third innings so far in 9 starts. He's only made it through 6 innings once. That was last time out. He had a decent game there. Before that, he had only started the 6th one other time. He went 5 and a third against the Dodgers. So it's not like he's been giving us good length. He's walking too many hitters, but there's just a good enough amount of strikeouts here. And outside of Yelich, outside of Avi Garcia, who, like you said, is better righty-lefty, I don't really worry too much about the rest of the hitters in this lineup. Locane is a good hitter, limits strikeouts, but he's not a major threat for power anymore. Like, there's not that much here. And then getting around some of these other guys like Travis Shaw, lefty, I'm not worried about if he's in the lineup. Colton Wong, I'm not worried about up top. Willy Adames is a nice player, but I'm not going to be too concerned with the 8-hitter here. So I just don't see a ton to threaten him. So I think if Blake Snell gives us 6 here, we're going to be in a pretty good position.
Yeah, 5 guys in the projected lineup who strike out above league average, so definitely should be some room to work here. And I think just the one thing I would say is I would just be reluctant. I know people maybe will treat the matchup against Milwaukee like, hey, lock in Blake Snell. And it's something, you're not really doing very often on DFS slates, and we've seen that within the last couple of weeks with guys like Garrett Cole caliber guys who have not necessarily gotten there in some spots. But I just think, to me, if people treat Snell like a lock, if that ownership comes up even higher, I think it maybe is time to consider moving some other directions. And I would keep in mind here Milwaukee as well for future matchups, just looking better, like just having more guys in the mix. Keston Hiura, I think, expected to be getting some at-bats again soon, and that's something where he hasn't been great against lefties, but still another hitter who does have some degree of pedigree that hopefully will start to improve a little bit more. Just the lineup just getting a little better in a way that I think is just worth pointing out. Let's talk about some of the other pitchers, Terry, and I feel like one other key one that we should hit on now, more of an issue on DraftKings, or more of a key part of the DraftKings lineup, is going to be Frankie Montas, going to be very cheap on DraftKings, has a 21.4% K rate for himself. He's facing the Seattle team that we have seen get no hit multiple times, so it's something that clearly makes sense on paper, but Montas' stuff has not been that good. He's projecting really well, Terry, and I think that's something that you can, if you're getting him on an optimizer, you're going to be getting him a lot. But how would you handle Frankie Montas with about half the field expected to be on DraftKings? And I guess give me your thoughts on Fanduel as well, if he's in play for you at all there.
Yeah, it's so much more about the spot here than it is about the pitcher, I think. He's facing a Mariners team. They're 7th worst in baseball, 25.5% strikeout rate against righties, create runs 13% worse than average against righties. He's at a good price on DK, a very good price on DK, actually, for getting in as an SP2 at 6,200. So I love the utility that you get out of him there. At 8,400 on Fanduel, 20-ish percent ownership, even in the matchup, it's a tough ask. He's been struggling this year. His 21.4% strikeout rate, 4.46 xFIP is not the worst in the world, but it's certainly not good. Certainly not something you want to be, really smashing for 8,400. If he was priced like he is on DK, I'd be more excited about it if there were good spots to spend money on bats. But he just puts too many guys on base. 1.40 whip despite a 6.2% walk percentage. Has not been the same pitcher overall since his PED suspension. So struggling with his control. He's generating 14.5% called strikes. So it's 11.7 11.2% swinging strikes, 11.7 last year, 11.5 the year before. Messed that up a little bit. 14.5% called strikes. So he's working off the plate a little bit. He's getting an 85th percentile chase rate, but it's not really benefiting him because the strikeout rate is down. So it's just hurting him. It's just kind of, I don't know. It's not a pitcher I trust. I'm getting an okay projection on him, but not one that would push him up ahead of some of these other pitchers for me on Fanduel. I think at that DK price, he's a totally different story. You can rely on it being a good spot and just pop in that based on value.
And it's worth pointing out for Montas, like maybe he doesn't get destroyed here today because he is pitching in a park that's going to be under 60 degrees today and is normally going to favor the pitchers anyway. But it does seem to me like Montas, again, another guy to me, you could shave some of the projected ownership off of, try to get to some different directions. I don't mind playing some of the cheap guys on the slate who are cheaper than Montas as well, in the hopes that maybe Montas does get bombed out and you see somebody else just get to a usable fantasy day. So Montas, a core play of the ownership on DraftKings today, but certainly one you can move around from a little bit more, I think. Terry, anybody else you want to hit on here? We started a little bit late, so we're running a little bit behind on the schedule. But in terms of pitching, I feel like we've hit on the core guys ownership wise. So Austin Gomber, maybe one more we can talk about briefly, projected for over 20% ownership, has been honestly serviceable on the year with the 24% K rate, not giving up a ton of production. So he's one I'll throw into the mix, Harry. But anybody else that you want to hit on meaningfully? And that can include the Mets mystery pitcher, who we presume is going to be David Peterson, but we don't know yet.
Yeah, I do like David Peterson in general. I think he's done some good work for us. So assuming that's who they throw out there, I think he is on the board for some consideration. But the guy you mentioned is somebody that I mentioned in my article this afternoon, gave some thoughts on him. He's been very good, striking out 24% of hitters, 4.26 xFIP, 1.30 whip. He's walking too many guys, 11.2%, but that's actually down from the 12.6% from last year. And he's only 5,600 going up against a really depleted lineup. So I think that's kind of an interesting spot if you're looking for an alternative way dramatic pay down pitcher on DK where you need an SP2. I think he makes a lot of sense over there as kind of somebody a little bit, not necessarily sneaky, but somebody who I like maybe even better. He's not in a great matchup given that it's Cleveland and everybody thinks the Indians, high-end offense. They drive the ball well in the split, 0.179 team ISO, 35 home runs, ranks them around the middle of the league. They've actually created runs 15% worse than league average in this split against righties. And Turnbull's biggest asset is keeping the ball on the ground, keeping the ball in the park. He's at 54.2% ground balls this year. Really good job limiting hard contact, inducing over 20% soft contact so far this year. In his career, he's never been over 0.85 home runs per nine, which was his the mark that he set in 2019 when he went 148 in the third innings. His only full season. He gave up 18 home runs in 255 and two-thirds career innings. To put that in perspective, Robbie Ray's given up 12 home runs in 47 and a third innings this year. Mike Foltynewicz hasn't given one up in his last 3 starts, but he gave up 11 in the first 9 starts that he's made, over 55 and two-thirds innings total. So there's a really good narrative for Turnbull, not to put up a dominant start in terms of he's going to go out there and strike out 12 guys, but if he goes out and strikes out 6 or 7 of them and just holds this Indians lineup down, their power marks are completely suppressed, I think we could get a sneaky good start. And he's at kind of the upper middle tier in salary on DK. So he could be a sneaky SP2 over on DK.
Yeah, and I would also say, too, I didn't realize that we had a David Peterson projection because I just kind of had a placeholder blank spot for the Mets starting pitching. But just to jump back to Peterson real fast, does project for over 17 fantasy points from Awesemo right now at a 7K salary. And he's somebody I've actually touted in worse spots in the last couple of weeks. And Peterson's up to a 29% K rate on the year with a 3.1 xFIP. And I was wondering who they were putting out earlier today because I noticed that low implied total and kind of thought, oh, maybe it's just because Colorado's so bad. But I think it is a cosign as well, and Peterson being a decent play. So he's somebody that, to me, if he is the starter here for the Mets, and again, just watch the lineup news here, make sure to check your Awesemo projections for the updates as well. Peterson is somebody I would throw a cosign in, but for me, I think spreading that Montas ownership around a bit more would just be, for me, the DraftKings approach that I'd be a little more willing to take today. Terry, anybody else that you want to hit on real fast, or should we just jump to the money time and do our little crunch time as well for Tyler to prepare, get some stacks ready?
Yeah, I think we got moving along. I have a 30.4 per Fanduel projection at $8,000 on David Peterson from my end, so I'm right there with you. And looks like Colorado, just overall the active roster on the year, right around the middle of the league in basically everything. 24.3% strikeout rate against lefties is 15th. Creating runs 1% worse than average, puts them right in the middle. 1.70 team ISO against lefties, so good spot for him. I like Peterson here.
All right, let's do some money time and get to the top 5 owned plays. Let me make sure to refresh it right, but I'll flip the hat and we'll give you guys these as well. And of course, you can always get all the Awesemo Plus data. Thank you, Tyler. Tyler, always so good. I got to give, we always give Tyler a lot of credit. Tyler and Jordan, 2 of our most cherished producers, but Tyler, giving them all the credit right now for just being so great at that cash register sound effect. I don't know why he's denying credit now.
And the miming skills he's demonstrating right now are just fantastic. Can you do the walking into the wind one, Tyler?
Yeah, Tyler, what a talent. I think that's really anything I would say for Tyler.
I don't know why we keep him behind the scenes.
Exactly. Honestly, he has as much of a credible case to be made to get on air more with the impressions that he could bring to the table. I think certainly dwarfs any of my projections or impressions rather of some of my coworkers, I guess. DraftKings top 5, hit that like button, guys, because normally we would charge you for this, but hey, we're here on the show. We do the best to make sure we give you guys the best that we can. So this top 5 owned plays brought to you for free today by Money Time. Number 1, Frankie Montas, 47%. Number 2, Blake Snell at 38%. Number 3, Lance Lynn, pitching heavy slate. Lots of ownership going to these guys. 36% for Lance Lynn. Number 4, Brandon Woodruff at 36%. And number 5, Anthony Santander at 31%. And Terry, I know you do know your Fanduel as well as anything as well, but DraftKings, 4 guys projected for the top of the ownership at pitcher is not something we normally see on DraftKings. And it is unique to me in a way that I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts on how that would change or enhance your tournament strategy.
I think that just kind of leans into what I said from the top of the show, is that I want to start spreading out to some of these other guys. So we didn't even really touch on Yusei Kikuchi very much. We talked about John Means a little bit. We mentioned Austin Gomber as an option. We mentioned Spencer Turnbull as an option. I think getting to some shares of those guys and mixing some of that heavy ownership, like if the field is at 36% or higher on all of those guys, and you come in at 25 to 30% on those guys, and you save yourself, 5-10% to spread out to some of these other guys, you're going to gain some ground. You're not going to hurt yourself too terribly if one of them goes off by being just a little bit behind the field, or pick one to be ahead of the field and pick one to be well behind the field, and then just go with the field on the other 2. And again, spread the remainder out to these other 4 guys. I think there's plenty of good argument for that. And there's plenty of path for these guys to be among the top starters. And at the very least, like, you can get these guys close enough where if you're rostering Austin Gomber for $5,600, he doesn't have to match Brandon Woodruff's $10,600 start. He just has to give you something that resembles a good start and make his value. And then he gives you so much room to make it up with bats or make it up by rostering another high-end pitcher alongside him that it makes sense to start getting to some of these guys just on that theory.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that this to me is sort of why, and I think the ownership throughout the day increasing to all these guys sort of really leaned in on the strategy that I thought was going to be the approach for this morning on the strategy show, but just kind of being a little bit more agnostic towards your ownership and being willing to spread it around a bit more, I think is the approach. And I think we've given you guys some pivots you can go to. FanDuel's top 5, Nelson Cruz, number 1 at 43%. Tyler, ecstatic to hear that. Number 2, Jose Ramirez, number 2 at 39%. Number 3, Tim Anderson, 34%. Number 4, Anthony Santander at 30.4%, and number 5, Josh Donaldson at 28%. And Terry, this is seeming, a little more like a stack ownership situation for really the game. The Baltimore-Minnesota game is going to be highly owned for stacks on FanDuel, it looks like. But anything jump out to you with this top 5 on FanDuel?
I think just based on that Jose Ramirez number you threw out, I pulled up the Indians real quick, and I'm one update behind, but it's relatively similar ownership. I think the public might end up in trouble there. I don't know how they rank out on our stacks board. I'll pull that up while I'm talking about it. But just based on what I was seeing for the Indians with Turnbull's ability to keep the ball in the park, keep it on the ground, I think they might win the game. They might win this game 4-3, 5-4, something like that, where they're not giving us a big DFS number. They do have a decent probability on our top stacks tool, and it is a good lineup filled with professional hitters. But I'm a little bit concerned, and there's no Franmil Reyes in the projected lineup either. They're taking a lot of power out of that lineup. So particularly on the back ends, there's some concern in that lineup for me. So once that starts trending up toward a hitter who's 40% owned in a lineup that I'm expecting to have some power reduction, some upside reduction, I start to get concerned about that. That's a spot where if they continue that heavy, I might look to get away from Indian stacks pretty quickly. I think the ownership in the Orioles game makes a ton of sense. I wrote the Orioles up this afternoon. Love the spot for them going up against Shoemaker here. So for my thoughts on that, you can hop into my article. I wish they were lower on. They're getting a ton of attention. But I think there's good hitters at the 5, 6, 7 spots at least that are not getting a ton of attention with Michael Franco, Freddie Galvis, Ryan Mountcastle. Freddie Galvis quietly having a nice start to his year. 6 home runs already, 153 plate appearances, a 212 ISO, 263, 329, 474 triple slash, creating runs 23% better than average. Hits from both sides of the plate, inexpensive. I like getting to him. Michael Franco has been weak to start the season, only a 133 ISO, a 199 batting average, 256 on base percentage, and a 331 slugging percentage. But there's upside there. We've seen more from him in the past. And if he's only going 4% owned in a popular stack hitting in the middle of the lineup, put him in your stack. Get to him. It makes sense. It helps offset some of this stuff. Mountcastle's in play as well. The Twins we talked about a little bit, just they get a ton of respect going up against lefties. John Means has been pitching well. If you believe in the regression, if you believe in the narrative that his luck is going to change, which I kind of do, makes a lot of sense to get to some Twins bats.
Yeah, I think we're going to talk about more of these stacks here, but I think that was a really good elevator pitch and how the stacks are looking for Terry so far. And I would agree. I think the Fanduel ownership on stacks in particular, some of these guys in that top five, some ways to get different with your stack by just knowing that the field's going to be there that heavy. But definitely some wrinkles here to the strategy that we could talk about. And actually, there was a question I had earlier on the strategy show this morning, Terry, that I'll ask you because somebody, I think it was Larry, who's I believe in the chat right now as well, mentioned the top stack tool versus some of the stuff you talk about in your articles, which are free on the day. As I assume they're free. If they're not, Terry, you can correct me. But are free for the most part on the site. And you're talking sometimes in those articles about your top six versus the top stack itself. So I know that was a question I had earlier, but is there anything you're looking at that's different than the usual top stacks tool, which is mostly just about the team's overall opportunity to get there? You focus in some more on the top six. So I'll just ask you if there's anything that you're looking at in particular for some of the people who are kind of figuring their way around MLB DFS right now.
So what they're probably talking about from my article is my power index that I started putting in there this year. It's based on my home run model that I make a home run pick from each team, and then I make my official home run pick for the overall slate. Everybody has fun with those. Been crushing it, by the way. So this year I decided to turn the power index into just something that would give a general idea of where the most likely home runs are going to come from a team perspective. And I give a number for the full lineup that's the average, and then I give an average for the top six hitters in a lineup, because that's usually where we're going to find the best hitters, most of the power hitters. And it can sometimes give a good idea of, where to look in a lineup. So like, for example, today we see the Orioles with a 13.83 mark in my home run model for the full lineup, but the top six is at 15.86. So we know that we want to grab most of our hitters from the top six. It's somewhat obvious, but sometimes there can be real outliers. There's not really a great example of that today, but where a team can jump several spots based on their top six versus their full lineup because of a few weak hitters at the back end. So it just gives you a general idea, but it doesn't take price into account. It doesn't take popularity into account. So it's a pure power index. It's not something that's saying this is your best overall stack with value or any of that considered.
Yep. No, that's definitely helpful to know. And that, just sort of lends itself to what we talk about a lot in here. There are a lot of ways you can sort of dice things up and look at it for yourself. And the top stacks tool is going to be more of a guidepost than anything. I guess one other question for you, Terry, before we dig more into the top stacks, we had some questions about exposures. And I think people sometimes think that the top stacks tool or top pitchers tool is just going to be basically like, hey, here's the exposure to paste in the fantasy cruncher. And that's not the case. There is sort of a lot of, chefsmanship is what I would say, where you are kind of salting things to taste, figuring out how it looks when you run an optimization and then balancing it around. But is there anything you do for yourself in terms of trying to get those exposures right that you think is just worth giving to the people out there? It doesn't have to be that deep into your special sauce, but is there anything you're doing to kind of land on those numbers that maybe people can try to follow for themselves?
Yeah, I'm always paying attention to, of course, the probability of a team coming in as the top stack, but we also want to be looking at the top value that Alex includes there, and we want to be looking at the ownership and leverage columns. Those two work together, right? The leverage is going to be the difference between their probability of being the top stack and their overall public ownership for the team. So we're always looking for positive leverage where we can find it. Now, if a team ranks really, really well and they're negatively leveraged, that for the most part makes them good chalk. It's different than in basketball, where good chalk is purely good chalk. In baseball, good chalk can still go pop very often. It's not like basketball, where there are plays where it's just like lock and load this guy. If you're getting 100% of them, that's fine. That's not how baseball works. We don't want to be locking in 100% of the Baltimore Orioles tonight, for example, even though they have a 0.5 positive leverage mark because they're 15.3% likely to be the top stack and drawing 14.8% public ownership as a stack. I'll give that one away from the top of the board. So we want to be paying attention, looking for positive leverage, but also I like to look at what is the differential between like the top ranked team or the top ranked pitcher on the top pitchers tool and say like the 5th, 7th, 10th, whatever, however long the list goes. What's the actual difference we're dealing with from top to bottom? Because a lot of days we'll get something like we talked about with the pitchers today, where everybody's ranked out somewhat evenly. So like the top is at 15, but the 8th ranked guy is at like 10. That's not a gigantic difference when we're talking about the probability of success, 15% versus 10%. So if one of those guys is significantly lower owned, a much better value in a seemingly better matchup, if I get him projected differently for whatever reason, that's going to be an indicator for me that I'm going to want to jump on that and take advantage of that spot. So looking at the top stacks tool on the DK slate, a team that ranks in the middle but compares very favorably to teams 3, 4, and 5 on the board with an 8.2% probability of being the best stack as compared to ranks in the tens are the St. Louis Cardinals, who are pulling a 3.6 leverage score with that. So they're going to be under-owned for their probability of success. So I kind of like to look for indicators like that. And it's about kind of cross-referencing and looking at the whole puzzle and putting it together in your head to find where those plays are.
Yeah, I think that's a helpful way to look at it. And again, I said it before in the chat to the guy who was asking and to everybody else out there, the top stacks tool, the top pitchers tool, all of that, the boom bust tool for NBA, really any of these top fighters tool in MMA. There's a lot of these for all the sports that we have right now, but they are just sort of, goalposts to figure out where the field's going to be, what the potential is based on standard deviations and whatever other special sauce is going on the Awesemo algorithms. But it's really more about, you have to figure out your comfort levels with risk. You have to figure out your comfort levels with ownership. And for the most part, for baseball, a lot of it's going to be following religiously, just not getting overexposed to guys, not taking the 50% play that the rest of the field is going to be 50% on. I think it's something to keep in mind, especially with the hitters, something to keep in mind there. But a lot of it is, unfortunately, for you guys out there who want the easy fix, a lot of it is just doing it every day and learning and seeing how it works for yourself and seeing how the optimizer runs for you and all of that. So that's the best answer I think we can give for exposures, but use the tools as sort of a guiding post to be the best thing I think you could do for yourselves. And speaking of what Terry was talking about, the top stacks was going to be Baltimore projected to be a top stack today. So this is one to me, Terry, where I think this is a good case study right away to figure out, hey, how do you want to approach things if you're new to MLB DFS? And Baltimore Orioles going to be owned really exorbitantly at the top 4. Mentioned Anthony Santander being a top owned play on both DraftKings and Fanduel. That is going to be the case. He's had some power, has been hitting really well over the last season and change, but still a guy that at 30% owned, I think I get the value component of it on DraftKings, but does seem like somebody you might want to move away from. But Terry, the rest of this Orioles lineup, they're going against Matt Shoemaker, who's not been good, a 5.4 xFIP on the year. Not getting strikeouts either, though it feels like he should get more strikeouts than he should, just because of the fact that he's getting swinging strikes for the most part, has been getting them since 2019 with an 11.8% swing strike rate, 33% chase rate, but he's also just really not getting strikeouts in a way you'd want to see with an 18.7% K rate. And it does seem odd with Shoemaker, Terry, that I just feel like he's one of those guys that should be a little better than he's been, and that gives me some concern for a very loftily owned Baltimore team. But give me your thoughts on Shoemaker and Baltimore, really people lining up to attack this guy. And maybe, I don't know, it just feels a little bit like it's either treat him like he's Matt Harvey. He's not quite Matt Harvey.
Yeah, I'm getting very good indicators on the Orioles, like seemingly everybody else is here. So it's difficult to make the case against. But looking at it, it's completely bizarre looking at his board on StatCast. He sits in the 74th percentile in chase rate, so he's good at inducing strikes and getting guys to swing at pitches out of the zone, but only the 5th percentile in strikeout rate. That's bananas. Those two numbers don't add up with one another in my head. 10.5% swinging strike rate overall, down from the last few years. He was 13s, 11, 13s, 12s. So his swinging strike stuff is down, a little bit of a downturn in called strikes. So overall, just throwing fewer strikes. I just don't love it based on the amount of hitters he's putting on base, based on the fact that he's not striking anybody out. I can't really argue against going to Baltimore here in terms of the matchup. I think they are in a very good spot. It's just a matter of how you're putting the lineup together. So on FanDuel, you get a little bit of relief on Austin Hayes. The public isn't going to be quite as ecstatic about him as they are on DK. It's the opposite on DK. You get a little bit of relief around Trey Mancini because he's extremely expensive, but he's in a very good spot there. Dancing around the Santander issue, I already talked about Franco Galvis and Mountcastle there, so I think you can do a lot with them and their sub-10 ownership on both sites. So there are ways to get to this lineup. It's just a matter of Santander in the middle. I don't think you want to skip them. I would definitely want to include him in many, many more of my Baltimore stacks than I leave him out of. I would probably limit how much I'm getting to him as a one-off for sure based on that ownership, though. Yeah, he's got the best mark in my entire home run model, and I'll spoil it. He actually was my home run pick for the day, but that doesn't necessarily mean at 34% ownership that he can't fail. So that becomes concerning, particularly if you're looking at him as a one-off.
So if you are trying to stack up Baltimore, and you sort of hinted some of the guys that you would go to instead, but is there one guy who really jumps out as, hey, I still want to stack Baltimore. They're going to be loftily owned, but I know I kind of have to get that ownership down. That's something we talk about a lot on the shows. If you are going to stack a 5-man, you have to either find a way to get different at another position or just try to get the ownership product for the stack itself down. And you do have guys like Mikhail Franco, 5% owned, Freddie Galvis under 10%, Mountcastle a little closer to 10, and the stacked catcher, never something a bad thing as well with Pedro Severino, a cheap price tag on him. Certainly not a guy who's gotten great power results against righties over the last few years, but still is stacked up with these guys where if they go off, he'll certainly benefit with extra at bats. Is there any Orioles player you would go to? I feel like for me, and I didn't mention this guy in the original grouping, but I do think Stevie Wilkerson at the 3K flat on DraftKings does have enough pop to sort of stand out to me as my guy if I'm getting Baltimore to just kind of decrease that ownership product and go his way.
I would probably be leaning more toward the Michael Franco middle of the order hitter. Even though he's, like I said, he's struggling a little bit so far this season, but we've seen upside from him in the past. 600 and change plate appearances between 2019 and 2020. He hit 25 home runs. So that's a little bit, maybe more than a full season, but he's a better hitter than the 199, 256, 331 we've gotten from him with a 133 ISO and 4 home runs over 180 plate appearances this year. Nobody's going to be on him. 2,400 on Fanduel, 4,000 on DK. If he's hitting fifth, I really like him in that spot. And then Galvis, like I said earlier, is having a very nice start to his season, a 212 ISO so far, and everybody's just asleep on it. Second base and shortstop eligible on Fanduel, under 10% owned. I really like that for 2,500. Wilkerson kind of concerns me a little bit. The price is right. Don't get me wrong. It's a 29-year-old quad A kind of a player, utility man type of a guy. Let's see. Stevie Wilkerson. I know I wrote something about him. 223, 281, 368 triple slash in 421 career plate appearances for a 29-year-old. It's more of an any given night kind of a dart throw for me. So if I'm stacking him, he would be in some of them, but I don't know that he really works as like a great end cap or really as like a traditional wraparound type of a guy. So I think my expectations would be a little tempered on him. Severino, yeah, where you're rostering catchers, certainly makes sense to throw him into a stack.
All right, let's get to some of these other chalky stacks because the White Sox also going to be very highly owned today. They have the highest implied total on the slate, 4.9 runs going against Kwang Hyun Kim. And Kim, we talked about briefly earlier, but has had a 24% K rate, not giving up a lot in the way of home runs, but the velocity is low enough that you'd have to expect the bats are going to start to get to him a little bit more. And the White Sox, Terry, going to be so highly owned. And I think this is one spot where you can point to the park factor as being a positive, a park that plays a little better for power. Also temperature, getting close to 80 degrees in Chicago. I think all look like positives, but Kim has been really good at sort of preventing, I guess, big outlier days. And he's actually been a bit unlucky with his BABIP, it looks like, with the 333 BABIP compared to a 260 BABIP going back to last season. That I think the White Sox, to me, just look, I mean, they look over on according to the top stacks tool as well. But I feel like there's a potential here that it could be more viable to take one-offs and take maybe a mini stack out of the team than the 5-man that it seems like the field will be doing very heavily today, especially on DraftKings. How are you feeling about the White Sox stack? And I guess, is the ownership getting to the point of being a little bit too onerous for you?
Yeah, it's another spot where, you know, it looks like maybe a better spot on paper, or when people think about the pitcher and the lineup that's going up against him, then it really maybe becomes. He's a guy, like you said, very low velocity guy, 89 mile an hour, 4-seam fastball, 83 on the slider, and then a changeup and a curveball that work with that. So one thing that yields is a reduction in the average exit velocity. If the ball's coming in slower, it's harder to hit it out faster, right? So he's 78th percentile average exit velo, 62nd percentile hard hit rate, 54th percentile max exit velo, only the 48th percentile in strikeout rate, only in the 18th percentile in avoiding barrels. So it's not like his guys aren't able to make good contact. It's just they're not able to drive the ball for as much power as they normally would be. So he is good at reducing some power upside here, and it shows in my home run model. I've got a lot of these guys with not quite the marks you would expect against a pitcher like this, and for an extremely right-handed lineup that's entirely loaded with switch hitters and righties in today's projected lineup, they're not really popping for me like you would expect. So I expect that I'll be well behind the field on the White Sox stack today.
Yeah, I get it. I mean, like, I get why people would want to go to the White Sox. They've been hitting it well. They've paid off as a chalk stack recently. They do have that 195 ISO on the year against left-hand pitching and don't strike out that highly either. But I think when the ownership gets as high as it is, like Grandal, I think in particular, like I would rather go to Yerman Mercedes at less ownership. I get he's a little bit more expensive, but there are some ways I think to stack up the White Sox and get more creative. You could also include an Andrew Vaughn, a young hitter who's been starting to turn it around and show some more signs of life recently. But I think really be careful if you are stacking up the White Sox, because they are going to be owned by a large portion of the field, and their construction, we didn't do the chalk talk segment today because we're low on time, but their construction is going to be one that pops up a lot for a lot of people when they pay down at one of the pitching options on DraftKings. So keep that in mind. Terry,
yeah, and if we get it, sorry, I was going to say, if we get it like it's projected with Nick Madrigal hitting second, that's a line. It looks like a good spot to jump in for, particularly on FanDuel for low ownership, but he's a slap hitter. I mean, that is not a big time DFS upside guy. I know we said that about him the other day, and then he put up like a 40-point night because that's what happens. But I'm going to repeat it here because it's concerning. Getting him in that spot, you're not offsetting that much ownership. On DK, you get Yohan Moncada at 11% and only 4,700. I'd be much more inclined to smash that spot a lot more. Way better hitter, way better for DFS purposes. You're paying 1,700 more for him. Figure out how to offset it. Don't try and thread Nick Madrigal into too many lineups thinking that you're offsetting very much there. It's a down spot in the 2-hole if that's where he's hitting.
Tell me who's your priority stack on FanDuel, because I do think there's a flat enough stack ownership that I say, for the most part, like kind of like we talked about a pitcher, being willing to spread it around, really much always going to be the case with stacks. But I think today in particular, you can make that case a bit more. But is there one that you're sort of viewing, Terry, as your priority stack and on FanDuel? And I guess if you had one that you see on DraftKings as well that you would treat as a priority, feel free to throw that in too.
So I think if I'm going to I think if by process, I'm going to end up a little bit underweight on the White Sox with their ownership. I think I'll also probably end up a little underweight on Minnesota given their ownership. So now I'm getting myself into some teams that either I don't really like because they're not very good teams in Baltimore and Detroit, who both profile well, both getting slightly negative leverage on the FanDuel board, but a lot healthier than the other ones. And there's definitely some good spots that you can thread in and out of in terms of individual ownership there. But then we're very rapidly starting to get into Cleveland, who I already badmouthed the spot going up against Turnbull for the lack of power. So I'm really starting to look at Oakland. I think St. Louis is going to be probably in play for me, given that they've got significant positive leverage here. San Diego's a good enough lineup that I'll certainly consider them. Those are probably going to be the focuses. I don't think I'm going to go to that many Brewers lineups. I just don't love the spot. I think they're going to get struck out way too much in that matchup. The Mets, I think the lineup is too diminished. I might end up with a little bit of frisky Seattle, just because they're ranking a little bit better for me than they do on the stacks board, and they're also not drawing that much public ownership. So for me, it's going to be looking for a lot of these leverage stacks, putting them together with the highly owned stacks, and trying to gain some ground against the field that way, particularly with where I think I can spread out comfortably to some of these pitchers that the field's not necessarily on. I think there's good paths to be able to do that tonight.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. And I think there are certainly a lot of bats that are going to have some upside. One that I just want to push back on a little bit, and I think this is one that they're not overowned in the top stack tool. So if you believe differently than me, you can. But I do think Oakland is a team that I just wouldn't mind just kind of taking out of the player pool on DraftKings. They do, again, project to be a little bit higher probability to be a top stack today. 7.3% chance of being a top stack combined with 6% aggregate ownership. But going against Kikuchi, like I've been relatively impressed by Kikuchi. I know people maybe still want to hold that one chalk mediocre day against him. And granted, that's going to happen sometimes. It's going to happen a lot in baseball. For you guys who are new out there to baseball DFS, certainly just be prepared for the fact that the crazy outcomes are going to happen time and time again. But Kikuchi in the spot, like just not giving up a ton of power. He's at a 4.5% on run rate, but I think been more unlucky than not with that. And facing an Oakland team that does have some strikeouts, 4 guys that strike out over league average. And I just feel like, Kikuchi, I don't love him as a pitching play, but Oakland to me, I think it's owned for this on paper power that they have every day. And I get it. They have a 197 ISO on the year against left-hand pitching, but the park plays so poorly right now. It's under 60 degrees there today by the time first pitch goes off. Like, I just don't think there's a spot to go to Oakland. And I feel like there are teams to me that just have a higher potential here. So I don't know if you have any feelings about Oakland or anybody else that you would dig in on, just to give people, I guess, maybe one team to try to rule out.
So I think I'm going to be on Oakland a little bit here. Okay. And the indicators for me that I'm looking at that kind of lead me to that are Kikuchi's contact marks, the batted ball marks. 16th percentile average exit velo allowed, 13th percentile hard hit rate allowed, 29th percentile barrel allowed. So guys are getting good wood on the ball. They're hitting it hard. I think that could definitely come back to haunt him at some point this year. He's been excellent, to your point. He's been very, very good at suppressing offense against 80th percentile chase rate, 65th percentile strikeout rate, 73rd percentile whiff rate. Just been very, very good since the start of last year, and those changes that he made that we've talked about. I do just like this Oakland lineup, though. Maybe I'm a sucker for it, but I think, at least 1 through 7, they're interesting. And then Stephen Piscotty certainly still has upside as a righty against lefty. He hasn't shown us much this year at 198, 280, 365, but there's upside there in the 8 spot. Elvis Andrews probably a little dead weight down the bottom, but I like the power in Sean Murphy, Jed Lowry from both sides of the plate, getting Chad Pinder back in the middle of this lineup, good righty against lefties, projected to hit 5th. Matt Olson is a very good lefty, and then the top 3 are all excellent right-handed hitters. So I like a lot about this Oakland lineup, particularly if they go under-owned.
Yeah, I get it, and I do see the power marks there.
You're not wrong.
No, I get why you push back on it. And I think, to me, they're just a team that I feel like people gravitate towards a little bit more, and I'm less inclined to get there when they are playing at the home park, and the upside's a little bit more capped because of that, but I certainly get it. And I think that, to me, is just one spot that I had. But Terry, we're running low on time, so give me your home run pick and let's close ourselves out, and give the people any plugs you want to hit too on the way.
Check out my article on the site. My home run pick and all a bunch of stuff we talked about on the show is up there. It's the tournament strategy article. The home run pick for today was Anthony Santander.
Okay. So
it was
chalk
an easy
donkey
chalky
Terry.
one today. Yeah, this one we had to go chalky this week. It can't all be the Bobby Dalbec calls of the world.
For me, I think I'm going to go I'm actually going to go to Christian Yelich for the rare lefty. And I feel like this is the only way that I could justify taking Christian Yelich. So he has been down a little bit on the year. I feel like this spot, him getting a random lefty dong on Snell, just, I don't know, it spoke to my soul here in the spot. Make sure you're following at Digital B21, follow at Chris Spags, follow at Awesemo_com, and tune in tomorrow, because if you are somebody out there who, for whatever reason, wants to be mad at Terry and I for existing and trying to break down a slate, we do have the boss man, Alex Baker, back tomorrow, so you can enjoy and bask in his glory one more time here on the Deeper Dive. But we appreciate all you guys for being here, especially the sane people in chat. We very much cherish and adore you guys as well. But tune in tomorrow. Tune into the tip-off coming up next, because I'm going to go jump over there, do that show with Aton and Eric Lindquist next. We appreciate you guys for being here. Enjoy your days. Good luck.
That'll be a fun show. I'm going to have to tune in for that. Eric? Yeah,